3 months after the antimatter incident, Horizon Station hummed with a new atmosphere of cooperation. In Hydroponics Bay 3, Kivix's tomato plants flourished, their vibrant red fruits hanging heavily from carefully tended vines. The Nefarian knelt among them, all 4 arms moving with gentle precision as she harvested the ripest specimens. "Your yield is 15% above station average," Miguel noted, analyzing the data on his tablet. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." Kivix's skin rippled with a subtle blue pattern, the Nefarian equivalent of a pleased smile. "I incorporated soil microbiome diversity principles from Dr. Reyes' anthropological research on traditional earth farming. The symbiotic relationships mirror Nefarian ecological systems in unexpected ways." "So you combined our methods with yours?" Miguel asked. "Yes," Kivix acknowledged. "The integration proved more effective than either approach independently." Later that day, Elena observed Kivix in Dr. Tanaka's lab, the same lab where disaster had nearly struck. Now, the Nefarian worked alongside human researchers, her exceptional dexterity complementing their theoretical framework as they developed a new antimatter containment protocol. "The human mathematical approach creates a stability framework," Kivix explained to a junior researcher, while Nefarian quantum theory enhances efficiency within those parameters. "Neither superior, complementary." Elena made a note in her evaluation report. Kivix's transformation hadn't been instantaneous. There had been setbacks, moments of frustration, flashes of ingrained superiority. But the change was undeniable and, increasingly, genuine. That evening, as Elena and Kivix reviewed human creative arts, another requirement of her cultural immersion, Commander Okafor's voice cut through the station-wide communication system. "All personnel to emergency stations. Radiation surge detected from nearby star. Shield reinforcement required immediately." Elena and Kivix exchanged glances before rushing to their designated positions. In the months since the incident, Kivix had been assigned to Emergency Response Team Delta, a deliberate placement that put her under pressure without risking critical systems. They arrived at the control center as alerts flashed across multiple screens. The nearby binary star system had unexpectedly ejected a massive solar flare, sending a wave of deadly radiation toward the station. "Primary shields at maximum," Lieutenant Faria reported. "But the radiation levels exceed design parameters by 27%. We need solutions, people." Dr. Tanaka's fingers flew across his console. "If we reroute power from non-essential systems." "Still insufficient," Commander Okafor interrupted. "At current projections, radiation will penetrate living quarters in 17 minutes. Kivix had been standing silently, all 6 eyes absorbing the data streams. Now she stepped forward. "Commander, I believe I can help." The room tensed visibly. Memories of the antimatter incident remained fresh. "What do you propose?" Okafor asked cautiously. "Nefarian shield technology uses quantum resonance to disperse energy," Kivix explained. "I can adapt your shield emitters to create a similar effect, but I'll need human assistance to implement it safely." Elena watched as the commander weighed his options. Trust the alien who once nearly destroyed the station, or face certain radiation exposure. "Proceed," he ordered. "Dr. Reyes, supervise." What followed was a masterclass in interspecies cooperation. Kivix outlined the theoretical framework while Dr. Tanaka identified integration points with existing systems. Lieutenant Faria handled power allocation as technicians modified hardware under Kivix's precise guidance. The modification requires simultaneous calibration at 4 junction points, Kivix explained, each with specific harmonic frequencies. Elena recognized the problem immediately. That would require 4 people with perfect timing. "Or 1 Nefarian," Kivix said, flexing her 4 arms. "But I need humans to maintain shield stability during the transition." 10 minutes later, as the radiation wave approached, Kivix stood at the central console, each arm poised over a different control panel. Dr. Tanaka and 3 engineers monitored auxiliary systems, ready to compensate for any fluctuations. Beginning quantum resonance integration, Kivix announced. Her 4 arms moved in perfect synchronization, each performing different complex adjustments simultaneously. The shield emitters whined as they reconfigured. For a heart-stopping moment, the energy output dipped dangerously. Power fluctuation. Lieutenant Faria warned. Compensating, Dr. Tanaka replied calmly, his hands steady as he adjusted the flow. Kivix's skin had paled with concentration, all 6 eyes fixed on different data streams. Almost there, integration complete. The shield display transformed, the uniform energy barrier now rippling with complex patterns. Radiation wave impact in 3, 2, 1. Lieutenant Faria counted down. The station trembled slightly as the invisible wave struck. Everyone held their breath, watching the radiation meters. Shield integrity holding at 92%, Faria reported incredulously. Radiation levels within safe parameters throughout the station. A cheer erupted across the control center. Kivix slumped slightly, the exertion evident in her posture. Elena approached her former student. "You saved the station," she said simply. "We saved the station," Kivix corrected, gesturing to the human team. "My solution would have failed without their implementation expertise." Commander Okafor stepped forward, his expression solemn. "On behalf of Horizon Station, I extend our gratitude, Kivix of Nefer." The alien straightened, performing the formal Nefarian gesture of acknowledgement with all 4 arms. "I am honored to serve alongside humans, Commander. You have taught me much." Later, as the station returned to normal operations, Elena found Kivix in the observatory, gazing at the now calm binary star. "Ambassador Threll contacted me," the Nefarian said without turning. "The Directorate has requested detailed reports on human Nefarian collaborative methodologies. Your approach to my discipline has attracted significant attention." "And how do you feel about that?" Elena asked. Kivix turned, her luminous eyes meeting Elena's directly. 3 months ago, I would have considered this assignment beneath my abilities. Today, I recognize it as perhaps the most important work of my life." She gestured toward Earth, visible through the observatory window. "Your species appeared so fragile, so limited when I arrived. I failed to see the strength in your diversity, your adaptability, your willingness to trust despite risk. We've had our own learning curve with the Nefarians," Elena admitted. "Your technological brilliance intimidated many of us. Technology without wisdom is merely sophisticated foolishness," Kivix said, quoting an Earth philosopher Elena had introduced her to. As they stood together, watching the stars, the boundaries between mentor and student, human and alien, seemed to blur, replaced by something more profound, mutual respect, hard-earned through crisis and transformation. In the vast expanse of space, where differences could divide or unite, Horizon Station had become a testament to the latter. And perhaps, Elena thought as she observed the once arrogant alien now gazing at Earth with genuine appreciation, the truest strength of humanity lay not in dominating other species, but in teaching them to see beyond their own limitations, a lesson that would echo across the stars for generations to come. 3 days into the Forian diplomatic mission, Elara found herself genuinely enjoying the company of Ambassador Krell. The Forian, with his translucent skin that rippled with bioluminescent patterns reflecting his emotions, possessed none of the prejudice that had become commonplace in coalition leadership. "Your species fascinates us, Commander Hayes," Krell said as they walked through the botanical gardens of the diplomatic vessel. "Such adaptability in the face of adversity." "Some would call it stubbornness," Elara replied with a small smile. "Admiral Vex, for instance." Krell's skin flickered with amber spots, their equivalent of raised eyebrows. Elara maintained her diplomatic composure. "The Admiral has high standards for all species." Krell's skin shifted to a deep blue. "We Foran sense emotional currents, Commander." The divide between humans and Tretians aboard this vessel runs deeper than mere professional hierarchy. Before Elara could formulate a safe response, her neural implant pinged with an urgent message from Marcus, Med Bay. Now. Eyes only. Ambassador, please excuse me. There's a matter requiring my attention. Krell's skin rippled understanding. We shall continue our discussion later. In the medical bay, Marcus stood over a young human ensign lying unconscious on a biobed. The ensign's face was marked with the distinctive burn pattern of a Tretian neural shock device, unauthorized for use on humans due to their different nervous system. What happened? Elara demanded. Ensign Rivera questioned a direct order from Sub-Commander Zex, Vex's nephew. The order contradicted safety protocols for human crew. Marcus lowered his voice. This is the third incident this month, Elara. I've been keeping records. Records that could end both our careers if discovered, she warned. Or save human lives. Marcus handed her a secure data crystal. It's not just physical abuse. I've compiled evidence of resource misallocation, falsified reports on human colony conditions, and strategic reassignment of qualified human officers away from positions of influence. Elara stared at the crystal, understanding the risk it represented. Marcus, this is borderline treason. Is it treason to document crimes? The Coalition Charter guarantees equal treatment of all member species. Marcus's eyes hardened. We swore an oath to the Coalition, not to Admiral Vex. That night in her quarters, Elara reviewed the data. Marcus had been methodical, documenting a clear pattern of discrimination that extended beyond Vex to a network of high-ranking Tretians. Most disturbing were the classified directives regarding human colonies, deliberate underfunding and resource restriction disguised as bureaucratic oversight. Her door chimed, startling her into quickly hiding the crystal. Enter, she called, composing herself. It was Lieutenant Kai Nakamura from Communications, a quiet officer who rarely socialized with others. He glanced nervously at the corridor before entering. Commander Hayes, he said once the door closed. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I know what you and Dr. Jensen are doing. Elara tensed, preparing to deny everything. I want to help, Kai continued. I've been monitoring restricted communications. There's more happening than even Dr. Jensen realizes. Why would you risk your career? Elara asked cautiously. My family is on Proxima Colony. His voice broke slightly. My sister just had a baby. They're already rationing medical supplies. By the end of the week, their network had grown to include 7 human officers and, surprisingly, 3 non-humans, a cell-carry engineer, a Vordash security officer, and a Meridian communications specialist, all of whom had witnessed Vex's abuses of power extend beyond humans to any who questioned her authority. The Furian diplomatic mission provided perfect cover for their meetings, as Ambassador Krell requested regular cultural exchanges with diverse crew members. During one such gathering, Elara noticed Krell studying her with unusual intensity, his skin pulsing with deep purples and golds. Later, he approached her privately. Commander, may I speak frankly? His voice was barely above a whisper. Of course, Ambassador. The emotional undercurrents I sense. His skin darkened. You are gathering allies. Building something hidden. Elara's heart raced. Ambassador. No explanations needed. Krell's appendage lightly touched her hand. The Furian Collective has refused 3 previous overtures from the Coalition. Do you know why we agreed to this one? I was told it was resource-related. Partially. But primarily, we have concerns about the direction of Coalition leadership. His skin rippled with purpose. We believe balance has been lost. Your species brings necessary perspective that is being silenced. The implication hung in the air between them. How much does the Admiral suspect? Elara asked. She believes she has impressed us with displays of Trescian might. Krell's skin flickered with what Alara had learned was amusement. But we Forans value harmony above power. We see the discord she sows. What are you suggesting, Ambassador? Simply that when you find evidence of this discord, the Forian collective would be receptive to reviewing it. As potential coalition members, we have certain rights to question leadership structures we would be joining. As Alara left the meeting, her mind spun with possibilities. The resistance now had not just internal allies, but potentially a powerful external one. Yet with each new connection, the danger grew. Admiral Vex had eyes everywhere, and the consequences of discovery would be severe. Still, as she passed another human officer whose subtle nod acknowledged their shared purpose, Alara felt something she hadn't experienced in years under Vex's command: hope. The GCS Dominion dropped out of hyperspace with a shudder that sent ripples through the ship's artificial gravity. On the command deck, Alara exchanged worried glances with Kai as they approached Helios Prime, a human colony that had sent distress signals 24 hours earlier. "Sensor sweep complete, Admiral," announced the Trescian officer at Tactical. "Detecting significant atmospheric disturbance consistent with severe ionic storms." Admiral Vex studied the holographic display, her 4 amber eyes narrowing. "Cause? Unknown, Admiral. The colony's weather control grid appears offline." Alara stepped forward. "Admiral, Helios Prime houses over 12,000 colonists. If their atmospheric shields are down during storm season." "I'm well aware of the colony's vulnerabilities, Lieutenant Commander," Vex cut her off. "Prepare a scout team. Minimal personnel, we cannot risk valuable coalition assets on an uncertain situation." "With respect, Admiral," Alara pressed, "standard protocol for a settlement this size calls for immediate deployment of emergency response teams." Vex turned slowly to face her. "Are you questioning my orders, Commander Hayes?" The bridge fell silent. Even the Trescian officers looked uncomfortable. "I'm advising based on coalition emergency response protocols," Alara replied evenly. For a moment, tension crackled between them like the ionic storms below. Then Vex made a dismissive gesture. "Very well. Prepare your response team. You will lead it personally, Commander." 3 hours later, Alara's shuttle broke through the turbulent atmosphere of Helios Prime, buffeted by wind strong enough to strain the craft's stabilizers. What they found below shocked even her prepared mind. The colony's main habitat dome was cracked, emergency force fields barely containing the atmosphere within. Auxiliary power functioned at minimal capacity, and evacuation centers were overcrowded with injured colonists. But most disturbing was what they discovered in the colony's data center. "This wasn't a natural storm," Marcus said grimly, reviewing the colony's sensor logs. "Someone deactivated the weather control grid remotely. There's a coalition override signature." Alara stared at the screen in disbelief. "Check the transmission origin." After several minutes of work, Marcus looked up, his face pale. "It came from the Dominion, Alara. Specifically, from the Admiral's private communication array." Back aboard the Dominion 12 hours later, after stabilizing the colony and evacuating the most critical cases, Alara called an emergency meeting of their resistance network in the rarely used auxiliary observatory. "I can't believe even Vex would go this far," Kai said, his voice shaking with anger. "Believe it," Marcus replied, displaying the evidence on a secure holographic projector. "And there's more. This colony was scheduled for an inspection by coalition humanitarian observers next month, the first human settlement to receive such an inspection in over a year. So she sabotaged it to prevent them from seeing the actual conditions," supplied Lieutenant Rhea Malik from engineering. "But why risk so many lives?" "Because she's escalating," Alara said quietly. "The Coalition Council meets in 2 weeks to vote on leadership appointments, including the Grand Admiral position. Vex needs to demonstrate that humans can't manage their own colonies without Trescian oversight. We have to act now, Kai urged. We have evidence linking her directly to sabotage that endangered thousands of lives. It's still her word against ours, Marcus cautioned. We're talking about accusing the most decorated admiral in the coalition of attempted mass murder. We need irrefutable proof and a forum where she can't simply have us arrested for insubordination. That's when Orlan, the Meridian communications specialist, spoke up. What about the Galactic Summit? All coalition species will have representatives present, including those not aligned with Vex. It's being broadcast across all member worlds. And we'll be providing security for it, added Tarek, the Vordash security officer. I could ensure you access to the main chamber. Ilara considered the possibilities. The summit is in 4 days. Can we compile everything by then? And more importantly, can we get it to the right people? I can help with that, came a voice from the doorway. They all turned in alarm to see Ambassador Krell standing there, his skin pulsing with determination. Ambassador, this is, Ilara began. As I mentioned previously, Commander, the Forian Collective has concerns about current leadership. We've been conducting our own investigation. His skin rippled, and a hidden pocket in his robes produced a data crystal similar to the one Marcus had given Ilara. This contains communications between Admiral Vex and certain members of the Trescian High Command. They discuss something called Operation Recalibration, a systematic plan to reduce human influence within the coalition through manufactured crises and strategic resource allocation. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Why would you help us? Rhea asked suspiciously. Krell's skin flushed with sincerity. The Forian Collective values balance. We joined these talks because we sensed the coalition was losing its way, becoming dominated by a single perspective. That is not an alliance we wish to join. His eyes met Ilara's. But it could be, if balance were restored. That night, as the Dominion continued relief operations on Helios Prime, Ilara couldn't sleep. The scale of what they were planning, publicly challenging the most powerful military leader in the coalition, was overwhelming. If they failed, it wouldn't just mean the end of their careers, it could mean the end of human political relevance for generations. Her neural implant pinged with an encrypted message from Marcus. Vex knows something. Security teams searching junior officers' quarters. Tarek says they're looking for unauthorized data crystals. Ilara quickly secured her evidence in a hidden compartment specifically designed to block scans, then composed herself just as her door chimed. Enter, she called, already knowing who it would be. As expected, Sub-Commander Zex stepped through, flanked by 2 Trescian security officers. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, he said with false pleasantry, a routine security sweep. I'm sure you understand, with the sensitive nature of our current mission. Of course, Sub-Commander. Ilara stood, outwardly calm despite her racing heart. Please proceed. As they began their search, Ilara knew they were running out of time. The next 4 days would determine not just her fate, but potentially the future of humanity within the coalition. They had one chance to get this right. The coalition central station hung in space like a gleaming wheel, its architecture reflecting the diverse species that had contributed to its construction. Representatives from 37 worlds had gathered for the Galactic Summit, an event that occurred only once every 5 standard years. Ilara adjusted her dress uniform as the Dominion docked at the station. For 3 days, their resistance network had operated in complete communications blackout, using only prearranged signals and dead drops to avoid detection. The evidence was now distributed among 5 separate carriers, with Kai, Marcus, Rhea, and Ambassador Krell each holding a piece of the puzzle. Lieutenant Commander, Admiral Vex's voice came from behind her in the docking bay. You seem tense. Ilara turned to face her commander. Just focused on security protocols, Admiral. The summit is a high-value target. Vex's secondary mandibles clicked in what Ilara had learned was amusement. Indeed. Though I find it curious that you've taken such personal interest in the security arrangements. Your specialization is diplomatic affairs, not security. In my experience, Admiral, the two are often related. Vex studied her with all four eyes. You've been quite adaptable since our visit to Helios Prime. Leading the relief efforts personally, requesting additional resources for the colonists. Just fulfilling my duty to the coalition, Elara replied evenly. Duty. Vex seemed to taste the word. You know, Hayes, that's what separates great leaders from merely adequate ones, understanding that sometimes duty requires difficult decisions. Decisions that may seem cruel in the short term, but serve greater purposes. The implication hung in the air between them. Elara maintained her composure with effort. I'll remember that, Admiral. See that you do. Vex turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Hayes. I've assigned you to the main chamber security detail during my address. I want a familiar face in the audience. Hours later, Elara stood at her assigned position in the Grand Assembly Hall as delegates from across the coalition filled the tiered seating. Through careful maneuvering by Tarek, their resistance members were stationed at key positions throughout the chamber. Ambassador Krell sat with the Forian delegation, his skin an unreadable pattern of swirling colors. The summit opened with ceremonial protocols, the Oath of Unity, the recognition of ancestors, rituals that had been incorporated from various member species over the coalition's 3-century history. Then came the leadership presentations. Admiral Vex took the central podium with the natural authority of someone accustomed to command. Her gleaming ceremonial armor caught the light as she began her address. Distinguished representatives, honored delegates, I stand before you at a critical juncture in coalition history. For 3 centuries, we have expanded outward, incorporating new worlds, new species, new perspectives. This growth has brought prosperity, but also challenges. Elara watched as Vex launched into a masterful speech about security concerns, resource management, and the need for strong, experienced leadership, subtly emphasizing Trescian contributions while glossing over those of newer member species, particularly humans. Recent events have highlighted these challenges, Vex continued. The tragedy at Helios Prime demonstrates the risks when developing colonies expand beyond their capability for self-governance. Elara's hand tightened on her ceremonial weapon. The Admiral was using the suffering she had caused to further her own agenda. As we vote on leadership appointments in the coming days, I ask you to consider who possesses the experience and perspective to guide us through increasingly complex. Point of inquiry, Admiral Vex, came a voice from the Forian delegation. Ambassador Krell had risen, his skin now pulsing with determined blue patterns. A murmur ran through the assembly. Interruptions during formal addresses were extremely unusual. The coalition moderator, a Juvian elder, leaned forward. Ambassador Krell, this is most irregular. I apologize for the breach of protocol, Krell responded, but the Forian collective wishes to present evidence relevant to Admiral Vex's candidacy before voting proceeds. Vex's secondary mandibles flared in irritation. The presentation of candidacy evidence has a designated time in the summit schedule, Ambassador. Your interruption shows a concerning lack of respect for coalition procedures. Perhaps, Krell acknowledged, but we believe the nature of this evidence warrants immediate attention. The moderator conferred briefly with other officials. What is the nature of this evidence, Ambassador? Documentation regarding the true cause of the Helios Prime disaster, along with evidence of a systematic campaign against human colonies and coalition members who oppose Admiral Vex's policies. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Vex's expression remained controlled, but Elara could see the tension in her posture. These are serious allegations, the moderator said gravely. Do you have substantiation? We do. Krell gestured, and one of his aides approached the central console with a data crystal. I object, Vex said firmly. This is clearly a coordinated attempt to undermine Trescian leadership. I demand to know the source of these supposed allegations. That was Elara's cue. She stepped away from her security position and moved toward the central floor. "I am the source, Admiral." The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to Alara. She could feel Vex's gaze burning into her. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," Vex said, her voice dangerously calm, "return to your post immediately." "I cannot do that, Admiral," Alara replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Not when the evidence shows you deliberately sabotaged the weather control systems on Helios Prime to create a crisis that would discredit human colonization efforts." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Vex's secondary mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among Tresians. "This is absurd," Vex declared. "I am a decorated officer with 2 centuries of service to the Coalition." "And that made you believe you could act with impunity," Alara continued, moving to the central floor where all delegates could see her. She nodded to Kai, who activated his console, projecting the evidence they had gathered onto the main display screens. "We have compiled communication logs, override codes, resource allocation records, and testimony from multiple species showing a pattern of discrimination and sabotage directed primarily at human settlements, but extending to any Coalition members who question Admiral Vex's authority." As the evidence began to play across the screens, Vex coded communications, the sabotage commands to Helios Prime, intercepted messages discussing Operation Recalibration. The chamber grew increasingly restless. Vex's composure finally cracked. "This human has clearly fabricated evidence to advance her species' position. Security, remove her immediately." The security teams, a mix of species, hesitated, looking between Vex and the damning evidence continuing to scroll across the screens. The Meridian Council representative stood. "These communications bear authentication codes. Are you claiming they are forgeries, Admiral?" "I claim nothing," Vex snapped. "I demand this insubordination be addressed before we entertain human conspiracy theories." But it was too late. Marcus had joined Alara on the floor, along with Rhea and other members of their network. One by one, they testified to what they had witnessed, the abuses of power, the deliberate undermining of human colonies, the falsified reports to the Coalition Council. As the testimony continued, Alara could see the changing expressions among the delegates, shock, anger, and in some cases, confirmation of long-held suspicions. Even some Tresian representatives looked disturbed by the evidence. The moderator raised his hands for silence. "These allegations are grave enough to warrant immediate investigation. Admiral Vex, you will submit to questioning by the Council's Ethics Committee." "This is preposterous," Vex hissed, her voice no longer maintaining its harmonious quality. "I have given my life to the Coalition. I will not be judged based on human deception." She turned to Alara, all 4 eyes blazing with fury. "You have no idea what you've done, Hayes. No idea of the forces you're interfering with." As security officers, now led by Tarek, approached to escort Vex to the investigation chamber, Alara met the Admiral's gaze steadily. "I know exactly what I've done, Admiral. I fulfilled my oath to the Coalition, to all its members, not just one species." The once mighty Admiral was led away, her armor no longer gleaming quite so brightly under the chamber lights. But as Alara watched her go, she felt no triumph, only the weight of what was still to come. Vex had powerful allies, and exposing her was only the first step in a longer struggle for the Coalition's soul. The investigation chamber of Coalition Central Station hummed with tension. 3 days had passed since Admiral Vex's public exposure, days filled with testimony from dozens of officers and officials from across the Coalition. Alara had spent most of those days under intense questioning from the Ethics Committee, presenting evidence, explaining connections, and defending the actions of her resistance network. Now she sat on a bench in the antechamber, waiting for the committee's final session with Vex herself. Marcus sat beside her, dark circles under his eyes testifying to sleepless nights spent organizing their case. "Do you think it will be enough?" he asked quietly. Alara looked at the secured doors leading to the chamber. "It has to be. The evidence is overwhelming. Evidence can be interpreted, Marcus reminded her. And Vex has had centuries to build allies in key positions. Their conversation was interrupted as the doors to the investigation chamber opened. A junior officer emerged, looking shaken. Lieutenant Commander Hayes. The committee requests your presence. Elara exchanged a glance with Marcus before following the officer into the chamber. The semicircular room was dominated by a curved table where representatives from 7 species sat facing a single chair in the center. Admiral Vex was not present. Commander Hayes, began the Juvian moderator who chaired the committee, we've reached a critical juncture in our investigation. Admiral Vex has requested to address you directly before our final deliberations. Elara's brow furrowed. Address me? In what capacity? She refuses to make her final statement without your presence, explained the Selkari representative. Given the gravity of this situation, we agreed to her request. A side door opened, and 2 security officers escorted Admiral Vex into the chamber. The once imposing Trescian looked diminished somehow, though she still carried herself with military precision. She took the central seat, all 4 eyes fixed on Elara. Leave us, Vex said to the security officers. Admiral, protocol requires, one began. I'm well aware of protocol, officer, Vex cut him off. I'm not planning to attack a junior officer physically. That would hardly improve my situation. After a glance at the committee chair, who nodded, the security officers retreated to the perimeter of the room. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, Vex began, her voice carrying the harmonic quality that had once commanded respect across Coalition space. You've shown remarkable initiative for a human. Thank you, Admiral, Elara replied neutrally, unsure where this was heading. Not a compliment, Vex clarified. An observation. In 200 years of service, I've never been outmaneuvered quite so thoroughly. Her secondary mandibles clicked once. Particularly by a species I dismissed as inconsequential. The committee members shifted uncomfortably. Vex ignored them, focusing entirely on Elara. You realize, of course, that what you've done changes nothing in the long term. Humans remain the Coalition's newest major member species, with limited understanding of galactic politics. With respect, Admiral, Elara responded, I believe we've demonstrated a rather thorough understanding of Coalition politics. A sound emerged from Vex that Elara had never heard before, a Trescian laugh, harsh and brittle. Indeed you have. But tell me, Hayes, in your careful investigation of my actions, did you ever ask yourself why I considered humanity such a threat? The question hung in the air. The committee members leaned forward slightly. I assumed it was typical prejudice against newcomers, Elara answered. Combined with your personal ambition. Simplistic. Vex's mandibles clicked dismissively. Ambition, yes. But not merely for position. For the survival of the Coalition itself. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Humans adapt too quickly, Hayes. In less than a century, you've progressed from primitive spaceflight to rivaling technologies that took other species millennia to develop. Your kind reproduces rapidly, spreads aggressively, absorbs and modifies other cultures without hesitation. That's called learning, Admiral. Cooperation. It's called assimilation, Vex countered. The Coalition existed in balanced harmony for centuries before humanity. Now. Already the power structures shift. Already traditions change to accommodate human sensibilities. The Meridian representative cleared her throat. Admiral Vex, this line of reasoning appears to confirm the allegations against you. Vex ignored her, still focused on Elara. My methods may have been extreme, but my concerns were valid. Mark my words, in another century, this will be a human coalition in all but name. If that's true, Elara said carefully, then it will be because we earned our place through contribution and collaboration, not through sabotage and prejudice. Naive, Vex hissed. But effective. She straightened in her chair. I've said what I needed to say. The committee may proceed with its judgment. 3 hours later, Elara stood with Marcus, Kai, and the others in the main assembly hall as the committee delivered its findings to the full Coalition Council. The evidence had been deemed conclusive. Admiral Nyara Vex was stripped of her rank and sentenced to confinement at the Coalition Rehabilitation Facility on Nereus 4. More significantly, the committee had ordered a full audit of all colony management protocols, with special attention to resource allocation and emergency response procedures. A new oversight committee would be formed with balanced representation from all member species. As the formal proceedings concluded, Ambassador Krell approached Elara, his skin pulsing with satisfied blue and gold patterns. Commander Hayes, he greeted her. The Furian Collective has officially voted to join the coalition. We believe the balance has been adjusted appropriately. I'm honored that we could help restore your confidence in the coalition, Elara replied. Krell's skin rippled with something like amusement. Not just restored. Enhanced. You've demonstrated that the system can correct itself when good people take action. His appendage lightly touched her shoulder. Which brings me to my next point. The Council is creating a new position, Director of Interspecies Affairs. Your name has been put forward as the primary candidate. Elara blinked in surprise. I'm honored, but I'm still just a lieutenant commander. Rank is less important than demonstrated capability, Krell said. And you have shown precisely the qualities needed, courage to challenge authority, commitment to coalition principles, and the ability to build alliances across species lines. Before she could respond, Kai hurried over, his expression tense. Elara, we've got a situation. 3 Tresian cruisers just dropped out of hyperspace near the station. They're demanding to speak with the Council about Vex's sentence. Krell's skin darkened with concern. It appears some of the Admiral's allies are making their move. The station's alert system activated, its lights shifting to emergency patterns. Security personnel began directing delegates toward protected areas. This isn't over, Marcus said grimly. No, Elara agreed, already moving toward the command center. But neither are we. The next 12 hours tested everything the coalition stood for. The Tresian ships, commanded by hardline supporters of Vex ideology, demanded her release and the dismissal of all charges. When the Council refused, they threatened military action, an unprecedented breach of coalition law. What the Tresian commanders hadn't anticipated was the response from other coalition members. Within hours, ships from 17 species had arrived, forming a protective barrier around the station. Most surprising to many was the arrival of 5 human vessels, newly equipped with defensive technology that had been withheld from them under Vex leadership protocols. From the station's command center, Elara worked with representatives from all species to present a unified response. When the Tresian commander attempted to dismiss her, the Selkari admiral cut him off. Lieutenant Commander Hayes speaks with the full authority of the Coalition Council, she stated firmly. Her recommendations have been unanimously approved. Faced with overwhelming opposition and unified coalition forces, the Tresian ships eventually stood down. Their commanders were arrested for sedition, and investigations were launched into Tresian High Command to root out the remainder of Vex network. 6 months later, Elara stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned CSS Unity, the first coalition vessel with a truly integrated command structure, officers from 12 species sharing leadership equally. As the ship's executive officer, she had helped design protocols that utilized the strengths of each species while accommodating their different needs. Marcus joined her at the viewport, now wearing the insignia of the ship's chief medical officer. Ever think about how different things might have been if you hadn't spoken up that day on the bridge? He asked. Elara watched as the stars streaked past, the ship headed toward a formerly neglected human colony that was now receiving its long-overdue infrastructure upgrade. Sometimes, she admitted. But then I remember what my grandmother used to tell me about human history, that progress never comes from comfortable silence. Wise woman, Marcus commented. She was. Ilara smiled. She also said arrogance eventually destroys itself when confronted with determined opposition. Her communication implant chimed with a message from the bridge. They were approaching the colony. Soon they would begin the work of rebuilding not just the settlement's infrastructure, but the coalition itself, creating something stronger and more equitable than before. As Ilara headed toward the bridge, she passed crew members of various species working together seamlessly, the promise of what the coalition could be when no single perspective dominated. Admiral Vex had been right about one thing: change was inevitable. But it wouldn't be human domination that defined the coalition's future. It would be balance. It would be cooperation. It would be justice. And those were principles worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the opposition. In the face of arrogance, sometimes all it took was one person willing to stand up and say, enough.